want to welcome you to one of the most remarkable journeys you will ever take. Come and join me as we walk the corridors of the mythological dragons and beasts of St. John's Revelation. During the 3rd century after the crucifixion of Christ, the powerful bishops and Arians came into debate on the floor under the guardianship of Constantine. Constantine was a Christian king, and he wanted a nation that was not divided. Thus, at the end of the debate, the Arians lost and their work was relegated to the Dark Ages. The bishops, however, knowing that humanity was illiterate, that they thought the world was the center of the universe, felt that the secret teachings of Christianity could not be given. To quote one of the early bishops, it would be like giving a weapon into the hands of a child. Among these secret teachings was the mysteries of St. John's Revelation. A new age has dawned now, and for the first time in the history of the manuscript, every single symbol will be broken and every mystery will be revealed to you. I am your hostess, Elizabeth MacDonald Burrows. Welcome to the first episode of Odyssey of the Apocalypse. The reason that we call it Odyssey is because you're going to find that the Apocalypse is a fantastic journey that rests ahead for every man, woman, and child. Oh, I agree. When we read of dragons and beasts and harlots and all of this, we're much prone to want to run the other way. And it's much easier for us to go under the idea or concept that we've been saved and that we don't have to go through this horrible judgment. Well, the judgment is not horrible. Every man, woman, and child must pass through it. And we will find that the Apocalypse, which deals with the resurrection of the dead, is a term, or shall I say, resurrection of the dead, is a term that we use for the raising of the divine consciousness and a transformation from human to divine. There is one of the scriptures in Odyssey of the Apocalypse that tells us that every man, woman, and child will one day become an angel after they have completed the process of the resurrection of the dead. I sit here with books, and there's nothing that's more impressive, perhaps, than a giant book like this. This was written complete and entirety by a man before he was 28 years old. But it gives evidence of the fact that the apocalyptic idea has existed for thousands of years, and that every major religion, beginning with the Zendavesta, taught about this wondrous day when God would come forth in all mankind and the world would be brought to peace. And I certainly include in this the Hebraic tongue restored, which I did not bring down with me, but was translated, the original Hebrew of Moses, translated by Fabre d'Olivet, when Moses said, on the 7th day God gathered himself from all parts of the earth and restored the world. There will be no peace on this planet until every man, woman, and child has completed this wondrous transformation. It is the consciousness of our future world. It is a consciousness that today is being born and shall be born in more and more as the centuries pass. Oh yes, we will be here for many centuries yet. So we may as well do the most that we can on this earth and with this earth that we live on. When I think in terms, rather, of St. John's Revelation, I am caught in the remarkable journey of my own life because it was about 1970, I believe in September, October of 1970, when Jesus, who became known as the Christ, made his first appearance to me. And at that time also made his wishes well known. So intrigued was I from this man from Galilee that I left no stone unturned to learn everything I could about him. I wanted to know what he ate for dinner and how he slept and what he wore. I researched manuscripts from the far ends of the world for over a quarter of a century. I have never been a person that is bound by dogma or preconceived ideas. I have always considered that the dogmatic mind is more dangerous than the hydrogen bomb. But mostly it is dangerous to themselves. Because whenever we follow a belief, a traditional belief, without the open-mindedness to search down the corridors of mystery and intrigue, we have cut ourselves away, often from our past, and certainly from our future. When the mind is open, when it is willing to journey this corridor of mystery, then the mind becomes expanded, and it grows and grows and grows, as there is no limit into knowledge. That wisdom is something we will continue to work upon and to learn as long as the soul has existence. And believe me, that is to eternity. But after Jesus appeared and I began the deep research of his life, I had no concept that I would ever be the one to do the apocalypse. It was in October of 1971 that many initiations, if we want to call them that, experiences, inner revelations, outer revelations, began for me. These initiations or revelations was in the form of the apocalypse. To describe this, I describe one night just as I was going to bed, and all of a sudden a great black light appeared and a great white light appeared, and they began to war. And as they warred, a voice was speaking to me and giving me revelation. And when the woman travailed in childbirth, I too travailed in childbirth. And so by morning, 5 a.m. actually, I came and was brought to the realization that God dwelled in me, but in me and all mankind. He dwells in you and in your children, and in the flowers and in the trees. So by that time I had what I would have considered the major keys for understanding Revelation, at least certainly on the surface. I had no way of knowing that my search for Jesus, the understanding of his family, his relatives, would one day bring me into the direct contact with John the Beloved. As I mentioned, when I was in Honolulu, Hawaii, and just finishing up with Pathway of the Immortal, and I was, of course, teaching classes there, someone asked me, what would I write next? And I said, I imagine I'll have to do a book on health and nutrition, but I don't want to. Someone said, why don't you do Revelation? Knowing that I had probably the basic keys, I said, yes, I think I will. I do not know at that moment what I thought I was going to write. I had no way of knowing that before everything was finished, that every single symbol in St. John's Revelation would be broken. So on that morning in April, when the voice said a surprise was in store, and I saw this great light enter my room, and in its center stood John, I suppose I should have been surprised, but because of the mystical experiences that had preceded this for so many months, the appearance of Jesus in my life, the open awareness of angelic kingdom, I was not surprised, but I certainly was astounded. John came each day, beginning in April, every single morning at the same time until October, when I left on world tour. We collaborated. I have to call it that because, you see, John always made me work for everything that I got. And when he came and gave me the keys to Revelation, everything was in the these and thous. Of course, I have since modified it, taking out the these and thous, because that is very hard for a person to read and to comprehend, and in many situations. We seem with the Western mind to be more capable of absorbing in a more Western ideal or language. I will be using in Revelation King James Version. It may not appear that I am, but when I wrote, of course, Odyssey of the Apocalypse, I put King James on the right and the interpretation on the left-hand side, so that anyone that was reading it would not have to have the two books side by side, screening them and trying to keep track of every single scripture. So those of you who want to join me for this next 26 weeks, if you want to have your King James Version out, you can go along with me as I read from it. However, today, we're not going to open the pages of the Apocalypse because there are things that you need to know. I want to talk about John and his life. I want to introduce you to, quote, the mysteries that lay the framework for Revelation. Because if you do not have these, it is impossible to understand it. There are three ingredients that are really necessary before one can even begin to work with the Apocalypse. You need to know Hebrew Kabbalah, which is the Hebrew mysticism, the father and mother of Christian mysticism, the secret teachings of Christianity. You also need to be familiar with the Gospel of Peace, which we just finished that series under Mystic Christianity, the Gospel of Peace, which was written by John the Beloved, and recording Jesus' secret teachings on health, nutrition, and angelology, so that we could commune with the forces of natural and cosmic law. This was broken down very clearly in the Gospel of Peace. We also need to have an understanding of the Essenes, because it was certainly the Essenes that instigated the angelology that was used in the Gospel of Peace, meaning there was every evidence that Jesus had certainly studied with the Essenes in his younger years, and certainly, of course, passed this on to John the Beloved. It is said that the Essenes produced three great masters: John the Beloved, John the Baptist, and Jesus the Christ. So we have to understand that. And then the next key, of course, well, it helps a great deal if John comes to introduce you to the work himself. He always came and stayed about 3 to 3.5 hours. And the thing that was always so amazing when he left, I guess, was I would pick up the scripture and I couldn't make heads or tails out of the next one. And then very patiently the next day we would begin where we left off. It only took about 6 very precious and very wonderful months before everything was done. He He did not stay around for the editing, the writing, the rewriting, reorganizing, and getting it to that point where it was released in hardcover a couple of years ago. So, no, in the finished form, he did not stay that long, although it would have been wonderful had he done so. He is a person of a spirit, a master. John is a man that, or spirit, a master. And that's quite different than thinking of him as the martyred saint that lived on Patmos. Many people picture him as living in martyrdom on the Isle of Patmos. I think we all know that it was there that he received revelation. But it was more than receiving revelation. John the Divine was undergoing the remarkable change from human to divine. The experiences as he wrote them in Revelation was as he actually experienced them. And of course, we're very aware that he must have had and did have a great sense of humor, and I found that in working with him also. His humor is such beasts and dragons and harlots in Rome, and only a man who is knowledgeable in mathematics, a man who is knowledgeable in transformational change, and above all with great wit and humor, could create such glorious and wonderful anthropos. And for those of you who may not know what an anthropos is, it's a composite figure that symbolizes something. For instance, the beasts are not beasts that ever existed in the past, or beasts that's going to exist in the future, or beasts that exist now. They are composites, and I don't want to reveal the whole secret, because we're going to take each one of these beasts as we come to them and show you what they mean. You're going to be very, very surprised. So as we go with the beast of the apocalypse, we're dealing with the most wondrous and marvelous dragon. And I'm always reminded of that story when the man had been, I think it was Adam, when he'd been wandering out in the wilderness of earth, and he kept trying to get back to heaven, and every time he went up and knocked at the door, they wouldn't let him in. So one time he found out who he was. He found out that his soul was immortal, although his body was mortal. So he went back and knocked upon the doors of heaven, and he said, "You can't keep me out anymore because I know who I am." He said, "My soul is immortal, but my body is corporeal." So the angel said, "Enter, Adam." And as Adam entered, there was this great tree, and around it lay this great dragon. And the dragon said, "Do you know me?" And Adam said, I know you. You are Satan who led me astray." So the dragon writhed and he said, "Indeed I am." And listen to these next words closely. "Indeed I am, for no one shall enter the kingdom of heaven whom I can lead astray." And then all of a sudden the dragon transfigured, and he became a great creature of light. And he said, "In the past you hated me, and in the future you will love me." Showing this remarkable transformation that encased in our lesser nature, we follow the ways of mortal and darkness and unknowingness. And having then awakened this great and wondrous light inside of ourselves, we turn and follow the light, only to find that this light dwelled in us throughout time and was the light that helped us overcome all obstacles since the beginning of time. Well, that's kind of the dragon that we're going to find in the apocalypse itself. But first, right now, I'm going to go to the blackboard, and I think the first thing we want to do is look at a little bit of the ancestry of Jesus and how John relates to Jesus in so much as when Jesus lived upon earth. After that, we're going to go into the basic symbolism. We will begin with Moses' tabernacle in the wilderness because it lays so much of the groundwork for what we're going to be covering. or at least a great deal of it, and it would be impossible for us to interpret Revelation without it. So I lay the great massive book, which, by the way, does have Tabernacle in the Wilderness and the keys and mysteries of the pyramid and the Masonic and so on. As I go to the board, and I'm going to draw up here, and I think maybe we will be better if we take this, turn this around where it isn't a shadow on the board. That should be all right. And we'll just have my head as a shadow instead. As we go to the board, Jesus' grandmother and grandfather was Anna and Joachim. And we did this in Mystic Christianity. This is just a little review to see how John fits into Jesus' life. So Jesus' grandmother, grandfather and grandmother was Anna and Joachim, who lived in Bethlehem, Judea. And of course, they were sheep herders, and so wealthy that Joachim gave 1/3 to the temple, and 1/3 of his holdings he gave to the poor, and the other third they lived on. There's quite a story about them, but that was covered in Mystic Christianity. But Anna and Joachim had wanted very much to have a child, and they were ridiculed by the people of Israel because they had borne no children. And Anna is now approaching into her 40s or 50s without bringing forth seed in Israel. And one time when they were going to the temple of Jerusalem, and Joachim is driving his herd to give as a gift to the temple, he was stopped by the gatekeeper, who was the son of the high priest at that time, who said, "What right have you to bring an offering when you have produced no seed in Israel and God has cursed you?" So Joachim left in great depression to go with his herds out into the wilderness. And Anna now was twice humiliated because first her womb had been cursed by God that she could bring forth no seed. Now she had lost her husband simply because she could not. While lamenting in the garden, she got to moaning and crying when an angel appeared to her and told her she would give birth, and she would give birth to a child named Mary. And she promised faithfully that if such a thing should happen, it would be dedicated to God. Thus it was that Joachim returned, and in their reunion, Anna became impregnated and gave birth to Mary. But she had to fulfill her promise, so on the 3rd year of Mary's life, she was taken to the Temple of Jerusalem to become one of the temple virgins. It was for this reason that they always referred to Mary as the Virgin Mary. Anna was lost, as one would be, who had waited long for a child, had had the pleasure of a child in their midst for 2 or 3 years, and then now no child. The angel again came to Anna and said, "You will bear another child, and you are to call her Mary, and she is being given to you for the child that you gave to God." So in a short time, Anna conceived and brought forth her second child, whom she named Mary. So when we're looking in the scriptures, we're always with Mary, the Virgin Mary, her sister Mary, and Mary Magdalene. So Mary, the younger, would be married to someone that we're all very familiar with in true style of the religion of the time. Mary would be espoused to Zebedee, and they would, in their union, bring forth James the Great and, James the Great and John, who would become known as the Beloved. Of course, Mary, at the age of 12, would become espoused to Joseph through the will of the high priest at the temple of Jerusalem, and they would bring forth Jesus. Now, they had, together, they had no other children. Joseph had had 4 by his preceding marriage. So it is not uncommon to read about Jesus' brethren when we read I think it was James the, let's see, this is James the Great, James the Less, and James the Just. And his brother would become known, half-brother would become known as James the Just. But we're not going to speak of them at this time. We're just going to show you how John the Beloved fits in with Jesus the Christ. Anna had a sister, or rather, Anna had a sister who was, I'm trying to remember what the sister's name was. Her sister would give birth to Elizabeth, spelled with an S. The name may come to me, I'll try to remember, but it is her sister's child, named Elizabeth, who would marry the high priest, Zacharias. Zacharias was high priest at the Temple of Jerusalem at the time that Mary was brought in to become a temple virgin. And so it was Zacharias, Mary's uncle, who accepted the child into the residential part where the virgins lived. Then Elizabeth and Zacharias would give birth, of course, to John the Baptist. So we can see from here that when Jesus came back from his journeys of the lost years, which many of those now have been filled in, but when he came back from those, he was in close connection with his cousins. His favorite cousin, of course, was John the Baptist. But John, as you know, was beheaded by King Herod. So as a result of this, it fell then to John the Beloved, who became his most devoted disciple, and to whom Jesus would, in essence, leave his power to. By that we don't mean that Jesus took the power out of himself and placed it on John. It just simply meant that John would have a long life, and by the way he did, I think he lived to be almost 90. He would have a long life, and Jesus' consciousness would be there to guide, sustain, direct, and to help him carry on his work upon earth. So it was John the Beloved who would be the recipient of the light of Jesus, in that John the Baptist had therefore been beheaded. That's a reminder of just a little bit of the ancestry. We went into it in much greater detail in Mystic Christianity. But we don't want to repeat ourselves, or the shows will get rather boring. As time went on, and John studied with Jesus, of course the disciples were initiated into the mysteries, to the mysterious teachings, teachings that were not given and have not been allowed to be given to humanity since the 3rd century after the crucifixion. We explained this, and we'll explain it again, that the church fathers at the 3rd century began to feel that the world was not ready for the mysteries. And what would later become the foundation of the Roman Vatican, they held a conclave in Constantinople when the powerful Arians, who claimed to have the great secrets, and the bishops, who felt they were directly consecrated by Jesus himself, would come onto the floor and would argue their cases. It turned out, of course, that the Arian and their work was considered heretic, and it was cast out, and it was therefore accepted at Constantinople that the bishops would retain the teachings of Jesus, which led, of course, ultimately to Asia Minor becoming a Christian nation. But were they right in holding back the teachings? I can't really answer that. If we keep from mankind what is rapidly, or shall I say, what is rightfully theirs, we have cut them off from a source of truth. And in cutting off from a source of truth, we often will take things exoterically or outer rather than inner. On the other hand, mass consciousness could not even read or write. So who is to say that they could have understood them anyway? And would it indeed have been like putting a weapon in the hands of a child? Well, time has come now when we have reasoning power, the ability to read and write, the ability to think. And now that we have gone 10 to the minus 43 seconds, a moment after the universe began, how can we any longer possibly conceive that Earth was built in 7 weekdays? Earth came as a process of 7 epochs. The 7th epoch, which is just beginning to dawn and has not yet materialized. The epoch when at last human consciousness will go into enlightened and divine consciousness, where they can perceive the ills and difficulties of their ways. So I don't know. I guess it's a matter of choice whether these should have been kept or not kept. We only are grateful that today they are to be spoken loudly and clearly to a mass of consciousness who at last can understand. It's said that in the Apostolic Constitution attributed by Clement, Bishop of Rome, he describes the early church. And he says these regulations must on no account be communicated to all sorts of persons because of the mysteries contained in them. It speaks of a deacon's duty to keep the doors closed, thereby preventing any uninitiated from entering the oblation. Tertullian, who died in AD 216, said in his Apology, "None are admitted to the religious mysteries without an oath of secrecy. We appeal to your Thracian and Eleuthian mysteries, and we are specially bound to this caution, because if we prove faithless, we shall not only provoke heaven, but draw upon our hands the utmost rigor of human displeasure. And should strangers betray us, they know nothing but by report and heresy. Far hence, ye profane, is the prohibition of all holy mysteries." Clement, Bishop of Alexandria, born in 191, said in his Stramata that he could not explain the mysteries because he should thereby, according to an old proverb, put a sword in the hands of a child. I was thinking that was Tertullian, but apparently it was Clement. He frequently compared the discipline of the secret with the heathen mysteries as to their internal and recondite wisdom. When we speak of heathen mysteries, we're speaking of mysteries such as the Eleusinian mysteries, the Bhaktic mysteries, the Buddhic mysteries, Hermetics. We can go on and on. The list is extraordinarily long. One would not know the answer to this, or the reason why this statement was made, unless they themselves had looked into research in the multitude of the various religions and philosophies that existed throughout time. I can assure you that every one of them, the center focus is on the resurrection of the dead. Oh, they use different words, but the meaning is still the same. It never changes. Archelaus, Bishop of Cascara in Mesopotamia, says, "These mysteries the Church now communicates to him who has passed through the introductory degree. They are not explained to the Gentiles at all, nor are they taught openly in the hearing of the catechumens. But much that is spoken is in disguised terms, that the faithful who possess the knowledge may be more informed, and those who are not acquainted with it may suffer no disadvantage." We'll read one more of the early church fathers before moving on, but we want to show you that the understanding of the resurrection of the dead existed for almost 3 centuries after the crucifixion. It was taught by Jesus to his disciples in private. It was John who brought forth the revelation of these mysteries. And it may surprise you to know that I doubt that if the church really had fully understood at the time that they were permanently admitted into the canons, if they had understood what St. John's Revelation said, it would never have been allowed. As it was, Revelation was put in, then they had another meeting, it was taken out. In time, it was brought back in again. Simply because it's the most guarded secret of the Christian world. Instead of, we're going to find out that the resurrection of the dead pertains not to graves opening up and bodies jumping out of the graves, or I say bones because we know the skin deteriorates on the bones, and skeletons jumping in the bodies and standing in line for a horrible judgment. This doesn't even match the reasoning power of the human race in modern time. No, we know now that the resurrection of the dead must have a completely different meaning. And we're going to find out that Revelation does not pertain at all to anything that's happening outside, but is an inner transformation. An inner transformation which St. John went through himself, and in which he left the record of that journey which every human being would take. St. Gregory, Bishop of Constantinople in AD 379, states, "You have heard as much of the mystery as we are allowed to speak openly in the ears of all. The rest will be communicated to you in private, and that information you must retain within yourself. Our mysteries are not to be known to strangers." So books like the Gospel of Peace pertaining to Jesus' secret teachings became a part of those manuscripts protected in the Roman Vatican. So in view of the early secrecy of the Church, it is no wonder that the dragons of the Apocalypse have haunted theologians throughout time. So now I'm going to go to the board one more time, and this time I'm going to put on the board some of the things that you're going to have to know. The symbolism is massive. Everything that is written is not as it seems. John wrote in absolute symbolism. And we must take every single symbol and we must break it down into a language that we can understand in order to get the full realization of the apocalyptic beauty. So I suggest that for your own reference, since I won't be referring to this too much again, maybe a little here, a little there, you might want to get a pencil and paper, and you might want to list these so that you don't forget them and you will have them for references. It's very difficult to since there are two sets of numbers that we're going to have to look at, it's very difficult to know which one to start with, because each of them, both of them, are of tremendous importance. Right now I've put the tabernacle in the wilderness up, and I'm just going to get my notes here a little bit. And you need to understand that Moses was not a man who had such a grievous sin that he was not allowed to go into the promised land. Moses had been a great and brilliant military general, and someday I'm sure we'll do a course on him so that we can introduce you to the original Hebrew of Genesis. But nevertheless, he was a great military general who was forced into exile when there was an attempt to execute him by the Pharaoh of Egypt. And while he was on Mount Sinai later in the quiet and solitude of becoming a sheep herder, he entered cosmic consciousness, the fusion of his mind with the consciousness of the universe, which of course I call God. God consciousness, God realization, cosmic consciousness. The entire plan, or God's plan, was given therefore to Moses. He put these into laws, and I mean laws. He is the only one that I can think of that was still giving laws on the day that he left his body, or died, as we might call it. He wrote nothing by happenstance, in that I have already done a draft on Covenant of Sinai. I can assure you that every sacrifice, every ritual pertain to this wondrous transformation that we're going to find in the Odyssey of the Apocalypse. Right now, we're going to introduce you to the tabernacle in the wilderness. The outside represented the court. This court represents mass consciousness. Our churches of today are geared very much like this. We have, in the church, we have the congregation. We have the minister, who reads the law from the altar. And of course, this is, in general, the Bible. So it is like there is a gate, some type of a restraint that keeps the congregation from the platform where the minister is. Very much as you will see here, that in the outer court, which represents mass consciousness, that they could not go into the temple, they could not go into the temple or the room of the holies or the holy of the holies. And the reason for this is there are 5 pillars which stand at the very entrance. And we're going to look at these 5 pillars because they tell us, it means the reason we cannot enter into the room of the holies is because we must discard the corporeal life. It doesn't mean to die of the body as you think of death. But it does mean that we have to release ourselves, the desires, attachments for the corporeal world. This represents the 4 elements. 1, 2, 3, 4. We are bound to the 4 elements through our attraction and affinity for the world of matter. Almost looks like the crucified man, doesn't it? Anyway, we are bound by this. So the central pillar, which is such the stalwart or strong pillar that holds, so important in holding the center of the tent up, represents here that great power that flows through mankind, which binds it by the 4 elements to the outside court. When we decide to throw aside our attachments and attractions for the corporeal world and seek that inner path that goes into the soul and into the light, then we enter the inner sanctum, the room of the holies. We find here an important key, the 7-pronged candlestick. When Moses saw the burning bush at Mount Sinai, this was an inner revelation. It is like a transfiguration. If we would have been standing by Moses, we would not have seen it. This was that part of God which put his spirit upon Moses, making everything appear differently than it was. It's hard to define, but I remember one time sitting in an office and wanting so much to see the Dead Sea where the scrolls were found, and suddenly my whole office transfigured and my desk was sitting out actually in the center of the Dead Sea where the scrolls had been found, or in the desert. Everything was as real as if my desk were actually in the center of it. This is how I can understand that we could have been right by John, because no one in the office where I was saw the Dead Sea or the desert with the cliffs that had the caves in them. Only me. So as a result of this, he saw the burning bush, and through it he understood how the consciousness of God flowed through human life. And he also understood the 7 epochs of creation. Now, when we follow King James in Moses, we will find there's a little bit of difference, and that is the reason that people unenlightened cannot interpret the words of the illumined. So as a result, they took things literally. They tried to modify it, and every time they modified it, they got further away from the truth. So we almost have to go back to the original Hebrew in order to be able to ferret the correctness of Moses' interpretation of creation. So the seven-pronged candlestick represents 7 epochs, which creation is to go through until we reach that 7th epoch, or the 7th day, when at last God gathers himself from all parts of the earth and restores the world. Over here were the 12 loaves of shewbread. They explained something to us. They told us that we are, as a human being, bound to this right now to the 6th epoch, that of human life. And that until we had united with our spiritual nature, we would be in 2 separate bunches of 6 to each loaf. And we're going to explain that. Don't worry, if you don't understand it, I promise you will before we're through, because it does play an important role in the early part of the apocalyptic traditions. Now, back here, the curtains are pulled aside so that you can see the Holy of the Holies. This is the 3rd compartment. This represents the spiritual nature in man. As mankind journeys, and by the way, when I say man, I mean both men and women, but when we journey inward to unveil the mysteries of the soul, and then we seek God, we are going to open that curtain that separates us from our own deep spiritual nature, the Spirit of God in us. And in that is the holy law. In it is God. So he put the room, the Holy of the Holies, in the 3rd compartment to represent the spiritual nature of mankind. There's other symbolism here that we're going to also have to remember, because it is used in Revelation. Certainly the 7th epoch, you're going to get very tired of it before we're through, probably. So no, I never get tired. I love good mysteries, and this most definitely has been one of the greater mysteries of my life. You'll notice that we have 3 colors of curtains. The lower part of the curtains were blue. Then we went on from red into the purple. Now, blue, and I'm going to take this, I guess I'm going to try to, I guess we can still go to the side. Blue represents the physical nature, because when Moses looked out and saw the blue sky shining over earth, this spoke of, and that life came from the sun and through the essence of daylight. Blue became the traditional symbol for corporeal world, the physical world, the human body, and a myriad of others. So this represents human. Before we could reach ascension, we would have to sacrifice the personal life. Red is the magnificent color of sacrifice, in which we have sacrificed our corporeal nature, or the attachments of the human world, to go on the inner journey to reach oneness with God. So red represented sacrifice, the soul sacrifice. So I always put soul by this, because that's what the soul has to do. The soul is caught between 2 worlds. For most part, it's in the human world. And over here is its divine nature. As it comes to the realization that it is divine and that the way home is inward rather than so much outward, it begins to raise itself from the enmeshment of the human world and enter more into its God world, like this. More and more it slides in until at last the soul and that divine spark of God that is in it soon or will become one in holy marriage. By the way, here is the true Armageddon, the field of Armageddon, Megiddo. I had run into a man one time who said, "You Christians believe that the final battle will be fought at Megiddo." I looked at him and I said, "It will be very difficult to have an all-out nuclear war on 12 acres of land." John used the word Megiddo to represent the desolation of the soul who was not one with God. Therefore, this would signify the true battle of Armageddon. And we will prove this to you before the 26 weeks has passed. Now, as red and blue are mixed, as human and soul raises itself, we come to the color of purple, which was, of course, became known as the color of ascension, meaning the two had merged together, risen from the corporeal world, and was now ascending. So I won't spell the whole word out here, but blue, red, and purple signify some of the symbols that you're going to know. In this drawing here that I had done, it does not illustrate the different colors, but if we could go for a moment to the pillars, if I can find them. If not, I'll do them from memory. I think that's what we will have to do. The base of these, if they were done in the proper manner, the base of these would be brass. So brass represents human. Polished brass represents the spiritual nature of mankind, which has been polished by the sands of time. Silver represents the soul, kind of like quicksilver. And gold is the symbol of God or Spirit or the indwelling Christ. I notice from the signals that our time today is up. I promise you faithfully in our next episode, we will finally open the first chapter of Odyssey of the Apocalypse, St. John's Revelation. Thank you for being with me. Peace be unto you.